Here we go. I'm not accustomed to do this, but I got my arm twisted. But how many of you still knew Tim from last year? I think a lot of you probably did. He did 2 different programs last year. So when he would start out for a disaster relief situation, he would say to me, I'll be gone so-and-so. And I say, I'll be glad when you come back. That was it. You're welcome. You want this?
I'm going to go up here. Good afternoon. My name's Tim. When they asked me what I was going to talk about, I was a little bit at a loss, but I kind of come up with these. I think the one last year was lessons from the Appalachian Trail. So I'm in the same theme. This one is lessons from Brethren Disaster Ministries. I guess I think in those terms because I'm still trying to figure it out and I'm still learning. And I want to share with you some things that that Brethren Disaster Ministries volunteer work has impressed upon me. So a little background. In the winter of 2007, I think it was, I went with my pastoral colleague and friend, John Long of the Beacon Heights Church of the Brethren, and a team of volunteers from Beacon Heights COB to Macomb, Mississippi, to help with the Brethren Disaster Recovery Project there. That was where the Brethren went the first year that when they started the relief effort after Hurricane Katrina down in the south. That was the first of several years of me getting to go south or choosing to go south, spend a week in the south in the winter or early spring to help with BDM outreach to victims of Hurricane Katrina. I think I went south to help with Katrina recovery work every year until that project closed in June 2011. And you can look all this information up, and sometimes if you go to the Brethren Disaster Ministries site, you can even find some links to YouTube, little YouTube videos about some of the projects. So I learned as I was getting ready for this presentation today, sharing with you today, that during the nearly 6-year response, Brethren Disaster Ministries volunteers repaired or rebuilt 531 families, rebuilt or repaired homes for 531 families in 6 communities along the Gulf Coast, giving an estimated value of $6,776,000 in 2010 dollars of worth putting that much back into housing in that area for folks that couldn't afford to replace that or do that work themselves. I don't remember exactly what kind of work I did that first year, working out of Macomb, probably mudding drywall, sanding drywall, putting on another coat of mud on the drywall, sanding that off until the project manager finally pronounced the room ready to paint. But the most memorable sub-project of that first year was one that I never saw in person and never helped with, but I see it in my imagination to this day. One of the other Beacon Heights crews or teams went to try to rehabilitate the plumbing in someone's house. The smell was pretty bad, and when someone crawled under the house to check supply and drain lines, they discovered that at some point something had happened to disconnect the toilet drain. And for some period of time, whatever was flushed down the toilet was falling into the crawl space below and accumulating. One of the posts that used to support the first floor of that house was sinking into that miry mess. So the team, one brave member in particular, as I understood it, began to fill in that miry space with blocks and bricks to try to shore it up until they could give that floor a solid post to rest on. The report I remember was that at the end of one day, several concrete blocks had disappeared into the muddy, fecal mess, and they had not yet seen blocks rise to level 2, emerge from it to support that first floor beam. I continue to wonder if I could have done what that Beacon Heights volunteer did. I continue to marvel that they pushed block after block under that house and had to get way too close for comfort to that mess to try to place those blocks where they needed to be to support the house. But I think I know, and if you think about it, you might be able to imagine too, how he brought himself to go under that house again and again and again, to creep toward that miry mess again and again, to try to heave or place a block close enough in it to shore up the foundation of the house and make it livable again. I think he trained for that service every time he knelt at Love Feast to wash somebody else's feet. Jesus said after he washed his disciples' feet, "If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought also wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you should also do as I have done to you. Very truly, I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sends them. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." So in the ensuing years, I have enjoyed working on all kinds of projects, all kinds of adventures. The traveling is half the fun, with traveling with other people. And oftentimes when we went down to Katrina, we started Katrina relief. We started late in the night or early in the morning and drove all night. I worked at projects in the Tennessees, in the Carolinas, Florida, and in 2019 and 2020, I got 2 chances to go to Castañar, Puerto Rico, to help repair houses damaged by Hurricane Maria. That was my first immersion in a culture where Spanish is the dominant language, which is not my native tongue, nor did I have much practice at it. Fortunately, most of the time there were people there to help interpret for us, and the rest of the time the local folks were, according to that culture, as that culture is, very hospitable, very kind, as helpful as they could be. Brethren Disaster Ministries orientation always reminds volunteers that we represent the church wherever we are, whenever we're in public, that we are guests. So if the host church asks men to wear shirt and shorts when walking to and from the shower, that's what we do, even though that might not be what we would do at home. However hot it may be, we honor their sensitivities. As Paul reminds in 1 Corinthians 10, why should my liberty be subject somebody else to a sense of violate someone else's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, that he's speaking of food, why should I be denounced for that? for which I give thanks. But whether you eat or drink, when you go to the shower, this is paraphrased, I think. When you go to the shower, do everything for the glory of God. The hardest challenge for me in Puerto Rico was disposing of used toilet paper. This is not the whole theme of this, but this came up again. It occurs to me as I put this meditation together. The sewage infrastructure there is more fragile, and so they ask that no paper products be flushed. So one disposes of used toilet paper in the wastebasket and not in the toilet. It's a hard habit for an old guy like me to break, but usually I remembered. And each of us then took our turns in emptying those trash cans and taking out the trash. When in Puerto Rico, do as the Puerto Ricans do. Too many of us Americans think we have the best, that we are the best, that we know the best, and that the world would just be a better place if everybody else would just simply do things the way we do them. But the truth is, we don't even do things the same way amongst ourselves. As you well know, if you've traveled very far in the United States, the people in New Orleans or of St. Bernard's Parish don't organize their lives or their homes the way middle-class Church of the Brethren folks from Indiana or Ohio or Pennsylvania or Virginia do. Brethren and other Christians who join the BDM volunteers come from economically comfortable, mostly circumstances, and operate from really different mental, emotional, and spiritual spaces. Different ideas of what makes a house a home, of what makes a house comfortable or livable. Different people from different climates and different value systems and different economic and material circumstances probably have different priorities in what they most want fixed, what they most want repaired, how they want the finished work to look, and how they will decorate it. Sometimes Brethren Disaster Ministries volunteers need to remember that we're doing this work for the homeowner and not for ourselves. We need as much as we can to defer to their priorities and fix things the way the owners have agreed with the management team, the project managers, that the job will be done. After all, we get to go home in a week or two to our homes, which we have arranged and decorated the way we want them, in the ways that make us comfortable. I usually try not to talk about politics with people I've just met, people I'll only spend a week with and maybe never see again, but sometimes in casual conversation about something else, you get an idea of where that volunteer might be coming from. So you get that little twinge in your stomach and you don't know what to say. But the work is always there, and if you focus on the work, those problems go away. And we do good work together. Me and folks that come from really different places, theologically and politically and philosophically. And that's been an important lesson for me, a lesson I need to learn again and again and again. And when I was writing this, it occurred to me, why do I keep writing about that? Apparently because I'm still needing to see the evidence of that and see that and be called to that. It's a lesson that is meaningful to me because we exist right now in a culture, in a nation, in a political milieu, and unfortunately, even within the church, a milieu, a culture of hostile name-calling tribalism, which infects our social media, our culture, our church. And you know it's there. You can't do social media, you can hardly watch the television without getting hints of it or more. This vital truth is one that I need to learn again and again and again, that I can work with and eat with and tease and joke with people who see things really differently than the way I do on the with really different perspectives on faith and politics and life. And we can enjoy working together, and we can do a good thing for somebody who's faced a hardship far greater than we've probably ever seen. Even more, to work side by side with people who think so differently from me, who see the world so differently from me, makes it harder to think the critical thoughts that poison the way we think about those who differ from us. Makes it harder to think that they have hostile motives or that they are maliciously trying to disagree with us, to contradict us. Because again and again and again, I find that folks that I'm working shoulder to shoulder with have hearts to help others. When they talk about why they're volunteering, the reasons really are very similar to mine. And the reward is connections that surprise and bless us. A year or so ago, I was working with a volunteer group from the Bremen Church of the Brethren in Dayton, Ohio, on a house that we were getting to be remodeled for a Pathways to Homeownership program there. As we pulled off the drywall and pulled down the ceilings, as the insulation fell on our heads and down our shirts, we also began to discover little artifacts left behind from one of the families that had lived there. An old newspaper, a baby shoe, love letters from a soldier to his fiancée. In fact, we happened to get to read the one in which I think he hinted for at least one of the times in his writing that he wanted her to marry him. Bits and pieces of children's toys. We collected those artifacts and took them back to Sammy, our project leader, who collected them and began to try to research, because we had the names in the letters, if any surviving relatives of this man and this woman might be around, or where they might be. She found the name. She kept digging until she found that the soldier and his fiancée became members, or had been members, of the Happy Corner Church of the Brethren. Their children were still living. At least one of their daughters lived in the Dayton area. And when in time, the contact was arranged for her to come and get those pieces. And if you were reading your messenger closely, I looked up, tried to find this article, I couldn't find it. But there was a little brief blurb on that that showed up in the messenger a few months later. Those are some lessons that I've learned, and I think they're important for our church, as I've said, because we live in a culture that wants to divide. We live in a world that wants to see differences. I'm not so sure that Jesus is a big difference seer. I think Jesus wants to include everybody. And when we get our focus off ourselves and our priorities and our stuff, and think about those things that are more important, like getting people back into their homes, I think we find ourselves united, doing something more important than arguing. Thanks for sharing these lessons with me.